What's up, everybody? Welcome to Moxie Bets, presented by Caesar Sportsbook. I'm Katie Mox. Today, we're talking the playoffs, and we are talking championship weekend with my guy, Leger Douzable of CBS Sports, Sirius, and ESPN. Leger, thanks for joining today.
Man, thank you, Mox. I was gonna make a little joke when we first started the show. Me and Mox have worked together for 2 years. This is my first time on Moxie Bets,
I
so I feel
know.
honored to be here today.
I am honored to have you, and I can't believe that I actually hadn't asked you on. Like, when you called me out, basically on air, being like, everybody's gone on Mox except for me. I was like, I absolutely cannot believe that.
Crazy.
So thank you for joining today. As we can see, I'm running a little bit behind on, but you know what? When we're talking 49ers in the conference championship game, I'm just keeping it real from my
Keeping it
head to my toe.
real, bang
Just
bang Niner gang.
they like, as long as I got this on, I don't really need anything else. Before we get into championship weekend, the biggest news out of the NFL right now, Jim Harbaugh accepted the offer to become the Chargers head coach. One, I'm so excited to see what he can do with the defense, and then also just he's a quarterback, right? So quarterback coach, what Justin Herbert is finally going to look like with a good
Man.
coach and a good quarterbacks coach. And then how do you think this kind of shakes up the AFC West rankings?
Yeah, I think it shakes it up a little bit. I would still say the Chiefs are the odd-on favorite to win every year when you have Patrick Mahomes in that
Yeah.
division. But you would think it opens it up for a discussion now, right?
Yeah.
With Jim Harbaugh, and you look at his history, everywhere he's been, Mox, he's been a winner, right? Going back to the University
Yep.
of San Diego, you go to Stanford, San Francisco. People tend to forget. I think
Were
there was a
you
3-week.
you played for
I
the
wasn't on.
Niners. Were you on a Harbaugh team?
No, so I was Kyle Shanahan's first year. I had him as a rookie head
All right.
coach.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, pretty good.
But just speaking of San Francisco, when he was with the 49ers, I believe they were a 3-win team. And then the next year, Mox, he turns them into a double-digit win team and they go into the playoffs. So
I know.
he has been known to turn programs around really fast. And people have always been wondering, like, when will we see peak Justin Herbert? I've been a fan of the Justin J. Herbo fan club.
Yeah.
It was a little hard for me this year because I finally had to admit that there's just something missing in regards to making those pivotal plays in the most crucial times in the game, right? He hasn't been able to do that. Well, with a guy like Jim Harbaugh, hopefully he gets him over that hump. And people were wondering, because if you look at Jim Harbaugh and his mantra has been a rugged offense, defensive line. They like to run the football, play good defense. So people were wondering, how would that mesh with Justin Herbert? And I liken it to this, right? If you're Justin Herbert, you have so many passing records your first 3 years as a starter. Like,
Yeah.
yes, this was his fourth year, but he was banged up, missed a good portion of the season. You would think that he would say, let me sit back now, see if Jim Harbaugh can get me to the next level, right? It's not about all these accolades and passing yards. It's about playing meaningful games in late January and February. And I think he'll have that attitude, because I think he's at the point of his career now where people are talking about all this talent that he has and all this talent that he has, but when is it going to, materialize into a championship?
Yeah.
And Jim Harbaugh can be the coach to get him over the top. So if I'm Justin Herbert, I'm excited. Yeah, again, I won't be probably throwing as much as I was when
Yeah.
other coaches were there. I won't throw 40 times a game, but I'll be efficient with the football, and we're going to win football games, and I'll be playing in meaningful games in January and hopefully even in February.
So you're talking about from Justin Herbert, but just from, like, let's talk about the entire locker room, right? You could tell that last primetime game they played in, that team did not want to play for Staley at all. They gave up. So if you're at home, and you see the news that Jim Harbaugh is going to, because this is a talented roster. Every
Yeah,
year, the Chargers are the sexy preseason pick
they
because
are.
you look at the defense, they've got some great weapons on offense. You've got Justin Herbert, and they just fall apart. And all of it comes down to coaching. So from a player perspective, you get that news. Harbaugh's coming to San Diego, or I guess LA now. What do you think?
Well, first, you got to really dive into this, Mox, right? Because we know the Chargers are in cap hell, right? So if you're a
True.
player, you got to first you have to figure out if you're going to be on this team next
Yeah.
year, right? Because
Yeah.
there's going to be some tough decisions that need to be made. There's going to be some restructures that need to be made for them to get under the salary cap. So first and foremost, you kind of worry about, like, where am I going to be at in my future? Then
Yeah.
once you get past that and you realize you are going to be on this team, you have to be excited, right?
Yeah.
This is a former player in Jim Harbaugh. He's relatable now. I heard he's a tough, rugged coach, right?
Yeah.
But I guess what the Chargers need, honestly,
Uh-huh.
because if you look at what they've been going through, and you see guys like Keenan Allen with their subliminal tweets in regards to
Yeah.
certain decisions that Brandon Staley was making. You're not going to have that issue with Jim Harbaugh. He's a
Yeah.
football guy,
Yeah.
right? You know what you're going to get. And I've talked to people that have played for him. They're like, it's a bit much to play for him,
Yeah.
right? But you're going to have that success. And he cares about his players, right? And he
Yeah.
coaches with a lot of energy. So you're excited, right? The big question is when he's filling out the staff, does he bring Jesse Minter over from Michigan with him, right?
Mm.
That's the big question mark because you talked about it, Mox. Brandon Staley was supposed to be a defensive quotation minded guy. It's just one of the worst defenses in football last year. So
And they had Joey Bosa
they
and
had stars.
Khalil Mack. Yeah, it's
Yeah. So you would hope that he brings over Jesse Minter, right, to really rectify some of the issues they
mhm,
have on that defensive side. But then again, like I was talking about, there's going to be some tough decisions that need to be made in regards to what they're going to do restructure wise. They got to find a GM first, too, Brock. So there's a lot
true,
to deal
true.
with this Chargers job. But if you're Jim Harbaugh, I think this was the pick of the litter because you have the quarterback.
Right, and then you get to live in Los Angeles again, which is a little bit
True.
warmer than Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Very true.
I will say. Well, let's talk about his brother now. AFC Championship game. Where this one, look, I'm excited because I'm a 49ers fan, but this matchup I think is the most exciting matchup. You got the Ravens versus the Chiefs. Chiefs obviously defending champions here. Ravens are 3.5 point favorites. This total 44.5. Now, my thought on this is that the Ravens are a better team than the Chiefs, and this
Yep.
line should be like minus 6.5 or 7 for Baltimore.
You
But
think it should
because
be
it's
that high?
but only because I think this line is narrative based because it's Patrick Mahomes
Of
and
course.
it's the playoffs. Right. But if you look at pound for pound, the teams this season, the Ravens are should be more than a 3.5 point favorite over this year's Kansas City Chiefs.
I would say the Ravens, if you were to put them just on paper, if we're just looking on paper, is probably
Yeah.
the most complete team in the NFL, right?
Oh,
And I
serious.
think you
Yeah.
alluded to that. So when you look at it, yes, it may be narrative based, but it's a great narrative. I mean, Patrick
Right. It's
Mahomes,
cashed.
he does what he does in the
Uh-huh.
playoffs, right?
Uh-huh.
Like he's usually unstoppable. So when I saw this line, I went back and forth because I was like you, Mox, like just by
Yeah.
watching the film, to me, the Ravens are the most complete team. The thing is, the Kansas City Chiefs defense is the best defense Mahomes has ever had.
Right.
Like this is the number 2 ranked defense in football. They're playing the number 1 ranked defense
Mhm.
in football. So when I looked at the line, I was like, if you take that into accord, right, the Chiefs defense, what Steve Spagnuolo has been able to do on this run with the Kansas City Chiefs, and it seems like the Chiefs are finally finding their mojo on offense.
Yeah.
I respect the line right now. Again,
Yeah.
like you said, if you look on paper and see how dominant the Ravens have been down the stretch, you're like, this should be a 6.5, like you said, 7 point
Yeah.
spread. But when you throw in Patrick Mahomes and what he's
Yeah.
done in the playoffs, 6 straight
Yeah.
AFC championship games, right? You throw in the number 2 ranked defense in all of football. Makes a lot of sense for this line to be 3.5.
Well, and even Lamar Jackson agrees with you because what he said on Patrick Mahomes, I don't like competing against
Yep.
him at all. It's like a heavyweight fight. To be a champion, you got to go through a
Yeah, I
champion.
got through him.
So that's pretty much the mindset. So yeah, I mean, even because it almost feels like even though they're 3.5 point favorites, the fact that they're barely getting over home field advantage, which typically is, a line of a field goal, it
Yep.
kind of feels like the Ravens are still the underdogs here, even though they're the favorites, just because of this narrative. And it's Patrick Mahomes, but it's Andy Reid, right? And it's Kelsey, who had a tough season, but has really come alive
Correct.
in the postseason. So, what do you think is the best strategy for each team's D line to try to contain these very different, but probably the two most talented quarterbacks in the league?
Yeah, let me start with the guy that should win the MVP. Excuse me, Lamar Jackson. Right
Yeah,
when you're playing against him, defensive line, and Steve Spagnuolo will have to think about this. Right, 4-man rush. Lamar has grown so much as a passer that if you just 4-man rush him and they're able to block it up, Lamar is comfortable sitting back there for 6 or 7 seconds until
yeah,
somebody uncovers. And if somebody doesn't uncover, he will take off. And the thing is, with his speed and a lot of people were wondering how much would they run him this year. I think they've been saving him for the playoff run. If you just saw what he did versus the Houston Texans, they were like actual called quarterback runs, more so than we saw in the regular season
right.
versus the Houston Texans. So the thing about this, if you're Steve Spagnuolo, he's routinely blitzes anyway, right? He likes to play man coverage, blitz. Will he do that with Lamar? And the fact that Lamar, if you're playing man coverage and you turn your back to him, you're giving up 20 yards automatically,
Yeah.
right? I don't think he does that as much, right? I think he's going to send a 5-man rush, and you got to
Mm,
have pass rush lane discipline. When I say pass rush lane discipline, it's almost like funneling the quarterback in, right? Everybody is responsible for their gap when they rush, whether you're a blitzer on the outside, a nose tackle, a defensive tackle, or you're an outside rusher. If you're an outside rusher, don't make an inside move, right? There's a
Yeah.
guy responsible for that gap. And we've seen at times during the regular season in week one, the Houston Texans had success with it. Even in that first half last week in the divisional round, the Houston Texans had success rushing 5 and everybody being disciplined and staying in their
Yeah.
lane. That's what the Kansas City Chiefs have to do. They're one of the best teams in football in regards to disguising coverages and
Mm,
showing you this on this side, Katie, but then bringing the blitz from this side, right?
okay.
So Lamar Jackson and that offensive line are going to have to decipher that, right? And I think that's one way that you can try to trip him up. If you force Lamar to get to his second progression, you can have some success as long as you have pass rush lane discipline. I think that's got to be the plan for Steve Spagnuolo. You can't 4-man rush him. I think you got to send 5, and even then, you still might need to have a spy. But we're talking about Lamar Jackson. If your spy's not running a 4-3, it doesn't matter, right? He's running
Yeah.
past him. So, like,
Uh,
good luck with that, trying to do that. Because, the Houston Texans tried to do that with Christian Harris, and he made 1 or 2 good plays, but
yeah.
Lamar made him pay down the stretch in that second half. Adversely, when you go to the other side, I think Mike McDonald, who I think should be getting some interviews, and he has for head coaching jobs, the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, he does a really good job of sending simulated pressure. And when I say simulated
Mm,
pressure, it's still a 4-man rush, right? But it looks like you're blitzing 5 or 6 because they drop defensive linemen out. But it's still a
okay.
typical 4-man rush. And guys will come off the edge scot-free because the offensive line doesn't slide right or they don't pick up the perfect protection. So I think Mike McDonald, when you're rushing Patrick Mahomes, you got to mix things up. And I think Luke Anarumo kind of had a blueprint for it a few years ago, the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. What he did was 3-man rush, play man coverage underneath, 2 deep safeties, right? And then he used Sam Hubbard as that spy guy. So Sam Hubbard would go out there and hit, Tyreek Hill or hit
Yeah.
Travis Kelce. Then he'd add to the rush. It forces Patrick Mahomes to be patient. And we've seen at times throughout his career, he has not been patient. He'll still try to force the ball down the field. Now, the last few weeks, he's done a better job of doing it. But when the Bills got that stop, and they only stopped Patrick Mahomes one time
Hmm.
last week, it was because a 3-man rush had a spy and had the 2 high safety look. And it forced Mahomes to be patient. And he was inaccurate with a couple throws. So I could see Mike McDonald mixing some of that in too. The first thing you have to do, though, you got to get Patrick Mahomes in 3rd and long. And I'm talking about 3rd
Yeah.
and 6 plus. You get him in 3rd and anything less than that, it's going to be tough for you, right? But if you can get him in 3rd and 6 plus, right? 3-man rush, man underneath, 2 high safety look, force him to be patient. You can have some success against him.
All right. So you've given us the game plan on how these defenses can beat these quarterbacks. So when it comes down to it, which quarterback do you trust more to get through that?
This is not a slight to Lamar Jackson, but it's
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes. I
Y-
mean, 6
It's
straight
proven.
AFC cha-
It's proven.
six
Yeah.
exactly 6 straight AFC championship games.
Yeah.
There was a big hoopla this week, Mox, or last week, as far as, well, he finally has to go on the road. Let's see what he can do on the road. All he did was take his offense up and
Yep.
down the field, 6 incomplete passes, only punted 1 time the
Yep.
entire game. He
Yep.
was damn near perfect versus the Buffalo Bills.
Yep.
And you heard him after the game said, they asked for it, they got it. This is what they wanted, they
Uh-huh.
got it. But
Uh-huh.
we're not done yet. We're not
Yeah.
done yet. We got one more. So I think he felt a way that everybody was making a big, hoopla about him being on the road for the first time. And he brought up a good point, right? In Tampa Bay, when Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl, like that was essentially a road game for them because that was in Tampa Bay's
Right.
backyard, right?
Right.
So like he's played on the road in the Super Bowl, and more specifically that Tampa Bay game, which really they really struggled that game too.
Yeah.
I might add. So
Oh
I
God.
think I think him getting over the hump in that Bills game has really added some confidence to this offense. And you talked about it, right? Travis Kelce, up and down season, but in the playoffs, especially the first half of last week,
Mhm.
he was
Mhm.
unstoppable. So he's getting in the groove right now. So right now, I trust Patrick Mahomes more just because, like you
Yeah.
said, he's done it before. This is his 6th straight AFC Championship game. But I do love the focus that I've seen from Lamar Jackson. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, he's dialed.
I know we're going to get to our picks and we'll talk about that later, but the way that Lamar is focused and this offense and defense for the Ravens is focused, might be one of those classic games we look back on.
I couldn't agree with you more. And so that's why I'll give my first bet first. I'm taking the Ravens. I'm laying the 3.5 with the Ravens because
Ooh,
Liege, this defense is scary and they've already
it's
hurt my
different.
feelings. Okay. And
It's
the
different.
49ers matchup, they put Brock Purdy in hell and they put
Blender.
CJ Stroud in hell. This secondary, and you got Roquan Smith, you got Kyle Hamilton, you got the corners out there. I mean, they are just unstoppable to me. And I think, look, Patrick Mahomes is a better quarterback than Brock Purdy and CJ Stroud are, right? Those are two rookies that don't have the experience and maybe don't have that killer instinct
Yeah,
that Patrick Mahomes has, specifically in the playoffs. But this Ravens defense is scary, and they're scary at home. They are 6-0 straight up and against the spread when favored by 4 points or less this season.
correct.
It just feels like it's written in the stars that the Ravens are getting to the Super Bowl this year. So I'm going to lay the 3.5, but you're on the opposite side.
I am, and I went back and forth. This was a hard bet for me, Mox, because I've
Yeah.
really been on this Ravens team. I said it a while ago, and you stated it perfectly. Scary is the perfect word, right? They beat you up. I mean, just look at some of the teams that they played, and
Mhm.
after the injury report after that game, like look at the San Francisco game. You know,
Yeah.
Trent Williams goes down. I think Christian McCaffrey was banged up that game. Brock Purdy had a shoulder
Painful.
injury. Like they just beat you up. The Miami game, multiple guys on that team got beat up after they played the Ravens. Like there's a different focus from this team, and just hearing Roquan Smith talk the other day in the press conference about like just staying focused and how he's blessed to be a Raven. And you know, as Coach John Harbaugh said, he didn't know he was a Raven until he became a Raven. Like, but he was
Right.
always meant to be a Raven. He literally looks like what a
Yeah.
Raven is, right?
Yeah.
And then Lamar Jackson saying it's almost like the second coming of Ray Lewis. And I always hate comparing GOATs to current players, but you see it, right? 6 year
Yeah.
span. Ray
Mhm.
Lewis, three first team All Pros. Roquan Smith, two. So like these guys are playing at an elite level. I'm going the opposite way because I feel like I would just be kicking myself. You're giving me
It's
three and a
just
half with
it's impossible to bet against the
you're
Chiefs.
giving
I
me
get it.
three and a half with
I
Patrick
know.
Mahomes. Like,
So the
you know what
Ravens
I'm
could
saying?
win. So the Ravens could win, but you think that they'll
Yeah,
at
I
least
think the
keep it
Ravens
within a
will win, but I think it's
field.
going to be a field goal game, right?
Yeah.
I think it's going to come down to the end. And if it was like 2.5, I'd be favored on the Ravens
Yeah.
side. But
Yeah.
you're going to get that hook
Mhm.
was the selling point for me to take the 3.5 with Patrick Mahomes. I just feel like you know, as a player, you always lean on something that could be like a chip on your shoulder. And I think
Right.
people talking about can Patrick Mahomes get it on the road? The offense just hasn't looked as good. Is this the beginning of the end for the Chiefs? I think that's giving them a little fuel, right? And there's rumors
Right.
also supposedly that Travis Kelsey could potentially, you know, retire after this year. So I think that's
Which
added incentive for him too. You don't
yeah.
think he'll retire this year?
No, I don't think he's gonna retire. He's not
Well,
his brother. He's younger than his brother. He's not
yeah,
as beat up as his
it's a
brother.
34. He's still up there.
But I mean, he's had an off year this year, and I think he's had an off year because he's had a lot more attention on him than
Mm,
he's ever had in his life. Hundreds of millions more eyeballs on him than in previous years. People that didn't even know he existed all of a sudden have posters of him, on his wall. So I think he had a hard time dealing with the extra pressure of the level of fame that he got this year, but I don't think he's done playing football.
Well, this is what I would say, right? How cool would it be say they go out and win it, right?
Yeah,
And you retire this year and be able to go into the hall the same year as your brother. Like that's
that's
why I
cool.
liken it to. And then like
That's
as
cool.
players, you just never know when you just like you talked about it, all the stuff that he's had to go through off the field because of the added star power. Like
Mhm.
that can wear you down, Mox. Like
Yeah.
I could even see a scenario where maybe he walks away for a year like Gronk and maybe comes back, you know?
Yeah.
Again, I'm like you. I think he still has, you know, 1 or 2 good years left.
Yeah.
But maybe he's just like, you know,
I'm
what if they
tired.
win this one? What I'm tired, 3 Super Bowl
Mhm.
rings. Like, what else do I got to prove? I'll
Yeah.
go down as the greatest tight end in NFL history. I mean, Shannon Sharp already called him that currently right now. So like I can see it. Like I can see, we've seen multiple guys walk away. Calvin Johnson walked away at the height of his career. Luke Kuechly, probably more medically based. Patrick Willis,
Yeah.
same thing. So I could see it. Like people. It's hard for people to understand, but like this thing is a grind. I played 10 years, and I think Travis
Yeah.
is at 11. Like this is a grind. Like it
Yeah.
can wear on you.
That makes sense, that makes sense, and now he's got a kind of a totally different life, dating a global,
Correct.
superstar. One thing that I find interesting that I wanna ask you, because you did say, yes, and it's arguably the greatest, if not one of the greatest tight ends of all time. I don't know if you saw Julian Edelman went on a podcast recently and was talking about tight ends in the league now, and he'd be like, "He's actually, like, more of an H-back. He's more of an H-back," and how
Yeah.
tight ends now aren't blocking, and obviously, I think one of the best blocking tight ends in the league right now is George Kittle. Do you think that the tight end position has changed?
Oh, it's definitely changed, right? And I think Julian Edelman said it perfect. Like, there's just H backs. There's guys that flex out as essentially receivers. Look at a guy like Evan Ingram, like he's a tight end by position, but is he
Yeah.
really a receiver, right?
Right.
Is he going to block anybody? No. I
Yeah.
will say this: Travis Kelsey will at least attempt to block you, right? He'll get in there, like he'll mix it in a little bit. He's going to come off
Yeah.
the ball hard and get in your way.
Yeah.
Younger Travis Kelsey would block you for real, but as
Right.
he's gotten older, it's kind of like Tony Gonzalez, like tricks of the trade. You're a veteran. I'm gonna just get in your way, right,
Right.
and stop you from making the play.
Right.
Where George Kittle is the quintessential like old school tight end, right? The
Yeah.
guy that blocks, can catch the ball, but he's more explosive than most traditional tight ends in
Yeah.
regards to when he catches the ball in the open field, especially down the seams. He's a hard cover, but they trust him so much in pass
Yeah.
protection that they'll have him against a defensive end, which my rule is always a tight end should never block you, right? As a defensive end. But
Yeah.
he's one of those guys, him, Mercedes Lewis, they kind of debunk that rule, right? Because
Right.
those guys are bred a little different. They can actually block defensive ends. So yeah, George Kittle to me is always been, for I would say the last like 5 years, the most complete tight end in the NFL.
I would agree, and it's kinda funny listening to him and Eric, Armstead talk to each other about how they used to have problems at practice because they would go at each
Well,
other.
I remember George was a rookie when I got to San
Okay.
Fran, right? And when he would catch the ball and get an open field, I was like, who? Because like
Yeah.
as a veteran, you pay attention to draft picks, but you sort of don't,
Well, he
especially
was
guys
a
like
5th
what
rounder. Yeah.
he was a yeah. So like, and the crazy thing is, he was a blocking guy at Iowa. So like, I
Mhm.
didn't know he had that in his bag.
Yeah.
So when he caught the pass, because I saw him in San Fran late, he caught the pass. We were in team period. He caught a pass and took it like 60. I said, "Who the is that?" They were like, "That's our 5th round pick." I said, "He moving like that?" They were like, "Man, he
Yeah.
ran like 4.5 at the combine." I was like, "Dang."
Yeah.
But I knew he was gonna mix it up blocking, right? Because
Yeah.
even like as a veteran, and Eric Armstead alluded to it, you're like, especially during camp, you're like, dude, once you get a certain year, you're like, all right, let's just get good work. Let's not
Chill.
hurt each
Yeah.
other. But like the first couple years with Kyle, it was
Mhm.
all out war. Like it
Wow.
was war training camp. So like as you get older, you understand the game. Like you want to get better, but you also want to take care of your teammates.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and maybe that's why there were so many soft tissue, injuries with the 49ers going into the first couple weeks of the season. All right, let's get back to this AFC, matchup. What is a prop bet that you're looking at for Ravens Chiefs?
Yeah, so I went back and forth. I like the Justice Hill over 33 and a half rushing yards. He's really
Mm,
come on the last few weeks. And it's crazy, Moss, because like there's opportunities where they give him the start, then they don't start him. But
yeah,
he's like always steady Eddie. Every time they need him to perform, he does that. He did that last week versus the Houston Texans, even though he didn't start that game.
yeah,
I believe he starts this game this week.
right.
And you look at the 49ers, their defense is all world. The one caveat, they've struggled against the run, especially against guys that
The
have that
Chiefs.
skill set. Oh, we're doing Chiefs. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. The Chiefs, the
Yeah,
Chiefs have struggled against the run. They're giving
yeah,
up almost 5 yards a carry. And if you saw last week versus the Buffalo Bills, I can't recall how many times on first down Cook was breaking for 8 yards or Ty Johnson was breaking for
yeah,
8 yards. Now, in the second half, Steve Spagnuolo made an adjustment and started adding more guys to the line of scrimmage and playing more man coverage in the back end. So it'll be interesting to see what they do because this Ravens team is the best rushing offense in all of football. They
yeah,
average over 155 yards a game, and they went over 200 last week versus the Houston Texans. So that's going to be an emphasis early in this game, right? I think when you look at the defensive tackles, Chris Jones and Mike Pennell, they got to have monster game, Katie.
yeah,
If they don't have a monster game, it could get ugly for the Chiefs, or it could be a shootout, right? Now, the
yeah,
only thing is, why I say it could be a shootout is because Patrick Mahomes is special, but that Ravens defense is special as well, too. So the
yeah,
the last thing you want for Patrick Mahomes is to be down like 10 or 14 in that game where you have to be one dimensional, right? And you're dropping back and passing versus that Mike McDonald scheme where he's sending simulated pressure and sending pressure every once in a while. So I like Justice Hill to go over the 33 and a half rushing yards against the Chiefs on Sunday.
I honestly I love that play, and because I feel like a lot of people, aren't looking at him because you said
Yeah.
sometimes he gets a snap, sometimes he doesn't, but this is
Yeah.
still a pretty low yardage for him in a big game where I think they're gonna try to spread it out a little more, so I love this prop. I was looking at Lamar Jackson, and I like 2 of his props, but they were heavily juiced, so then I decided to put them in a parlay.
Yeah.
I like Lamar over on his rushing yards, it's at
Okay.
64.5, plus an anytime touchdown. Again, both of
Ooh.
those things individually, -130, 3, a little bit juiced, together +220. I just think Lamar is on a mission. He is tired of the narrative that he can't play in the playoffs. That
Mm.
happened very early in his career. 100 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns versus Houston just last week. And the Chiefs have been actually pretty soft when it comes to mobile quarterbacks. We saw Josh Allen just put up, 72 yards on them in this
Yep.
last game.
Mm.
They've also allowed the 10th most rushing yards to quarterbacks during the regular season. And when we look back to Lamar versus the Chiefs, he's gone over this in the last 2 matchups. One, he rushed for 83, one for 107. That was his most recent one.
Mhm.
And career-wise, he's actually hit over on his rushing yards mark in 3 of 4 games. Now, the touchdown thing is a little bit weird, right? He only has 5 rushing touchdowns this season, which I was actually shocked about. But
Surprised about, right?
yeah, but 2 of them came last week. So I'm gonna
Yep.
say gets a touchdown, gets over on his yards. What's another
Mm.
prop you like?
Yeah, I like the Rashee Rice over 60.5 receiving yards. He's become clearly their number one receiver.
Yes.
Now, he did not hit this number last week versus the Bills, but I think it was because Patrick Mahomes literally was spreading the ball around and Kelsey came to life as well. And it seemed like he was a little banged up in that game too. I remember took that screen pass in the red zone. And earlier in the season, I think he would have scored on that, but he kind of got tackled at like the 4-yard line. I think he was a
Yeah.
little bit banged up. But if you look at this Ravens defense, right, they've given up that number to the opponent's number one receiver 3 out of the last 4 games. If you take out that week 18 matchup where a lot of the starters didn't play. So
Yeah.
I think Rashee Rice has just come on really strong. I could see the Ravens taking away Travis Kelsey and Rashee Rice being the
Yeah.
guy. I like him to go over the 60.5 this Sunday versus the Ravens.
Has he been the most kind of exciting thing that's happened on the Chiefs offense? I mean, all those drops and all those Kadarius Toney and MVS, and then
Exactly.
it's been bad, and
Cole
we've
Harmon
seen.
fumbles.
Yeah, and we've seen Rashee Rice really step into this, like, wide receiver 1 role. I think he's been, well, from a fantasy perspective, he's been great.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah, exactly. Is he one of the most exciting players you think that has kind of emerged from this Chiefs offense?
For sure, they were yearning for a guy to step up, and I think this was the master plan from the front office and Andy Reid when they took Rashee Rice. I loved him watching him at SMU. Called a few of his games because I call American Conference games, and then was
Okay.
able to see him at the Senior Bowl, and I knew he was going to be a starter. The biggest thing that worried me was his long range speed. Right, I knew as
Mm,
far as route running, the competitiveness to go up and catch the ball, in tight areas. He did all that really well, exceptional. And I had him as a second round pick, and that's where he went in the second round. So I think they were just waiting for him to develop into what he is, right? A little slow to start the year, but it's really caught on the last few weeks. And you talk about 100-yard games back to back to back. Besides last week versus the Buffalo Bills, but he torched the
yeah.
Miami Dolphins going down the stretch. He was torching everybody. He's clearly the number one receiver. Now, again, Travis Kelsey is technically a tight end, but he's clearly the number one receiver. Rashee Rice is number one receiver on this Chiefs team.
Yeah, I absolutely love him. So I'm going back to the well on something that didn't cash for me last week either, but I'm going back to it. I'm liking Mahomes over 26 and a half rushing yards. It's a little
Ooh,
juiced at minus
almost got it on
131.
that one rush for you last week.
Yeah, exactly. Like, literally just under it. But, like, here's the thing. The Ravens are gonna get pressure up front, and this secondary is gonna take away your options, right? It's
Yeah.
gonna make it hard for these pass catchers to get open. So I think he's gonna have to scramble and use his legs more often than not. And when you look at this entire season, he's had the highest rushing yards ever.
Yeah.
That it's like almost 400 or 419 or something he's had. 389, that's what it is. 389. He averages just about 24 yards per game. But again, I think game script for this, he's gonna have to make things happen all on his own. And we've seen him do it more times than not this season. So I like him to get over on that. All right. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're talking 49ers and Lions in the
Uh-oh.
NFC Championship game. Don't go anywhere. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the type of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Moxie Bets, presented by Caesar Sportsbook, here with Leger Douzable, previewing now my 49ers hosting the Lions in the NFC Championship game. It is the 3rd straight trip for the 49ers to the NFC Championship game. Hopefully, 3rd time is the charm, Leash, okay? Because we failed to make the Super Bowl
Man.
in the last 2. This line has gone up, opened at about 6.5. It's gone up to 7, favoring the 49ers at home. Total 51. When we look at the divisional round stats, Purdy threw for 252 yards, 1 touchdown. Goff, 287, 2 touchdowns. Which quarterback do you think is more important to the offense?
To me, it's Jared Goff, and I say this just because, and I
Yeah,
hate that I have. To, I say
I
I'm saying
I get you.
I hate that I'm saying this, Mox, just because of the narrative that's been painted with Brock Purdy. And, I've been on the Brock Purdy train since the beginning. Um, I just think this is a game Kyle Shanahan has to realize what he has in the backfield in Christian McCaffrey,
Yeah,
right? And what this Lions team has struggled with. But if you look at Jared Goff, right, what he's been able to do this season with all the pressure that was on him in the wild card matchup with Matt Stafford coming back into town and what that
yeah,
trade meant. Like
yeah.
a lot of people thought he was going to be on the trash pile going to
Mhm.
Detroit. They thought he was a stopgap quarterback, and he's turned
Yep.
himself into the franchise quarterback for them. And then last week, under pressure situations, to be able to go up 14 in the fourth quarter versus Tampa Bay Bucks and ultimately win that game. I just think they're going to need more from Jared Goff to pull
Yeah,
off this upset
yeah,
than in regards to 49ers and what they're going to ask Brock Purdy to do. Even though
right.
Brock Purdy showed with the pressure is high, he can deliver, right? He did that on that last drive versus the Green Bay Packers. I just think the Detroit Lions are going to have to lean on Jared Goff a little bit more if they want to pull off the upset.
So one, I agree with you because I do think that the 49ers on offense, not the Lions have a ton of weapons too, right? They've got that
Correct.
two-headed monster in the running game. They've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it's not like they're lacking in terms of weapons, but the 49ers do just seem to have like just a little bit more complete on offense. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. What do you think it is about Brock Purdy that is so polarizing for people? Because he didn't have a great game in Green Bay, right? Nobody is saying he threw some ducks, right? And clearly he seems to struggle a little bit in the rain. We saw that versus the Browns as well. But when the game mattered, he came down and he put a drive together that won them the game. You got Ryan Clark coming out here saying the hardest thing he has had to do this
Which
entire
is
season
nonsense.
is pretend that Brock Purdy is a good quarterback. Doesn't America love an underdog story? This is a kid that was the last pick in the draft that has come on and he's done better than any Niners quarterback since Steve Young has done. When you look at the stats, why do people hate him so much?
Yeah. It's a good question. I wish I had an answer for you, Mox.
I
The
think,
interesting
yeah,
thing that you said about what Ryan Clark said was that earlier in the year he was calling him elite, like he was praising him. So I'm like, which one is it? Like he had
yeah,
a couple bad quarters, and I went back and watched the game. He had some massive big time throws, like that throw to
yes,
Jawan Jennings over the
yes,
middle.
yes.
Talk about cojones, like
Mm-hmm.
there's been probably two quarterbacks in the league that would attempt that pass, and they played in a
Right.
divisional round against each other, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. But Brock Purdy threw it with confidence and threw it where only Jawan Jennings could catch it. And then let's not forget, like you said, on that final drive, that 3rd and 5 pass to Brandon Ayuk, the placement of that pass, and then depending on Chris Connolly, who had 3 catches coming into the game on
Yeah.
that 7 route on that same drive, and then using the mobility to get 8 yards in the red zone, like that's not elite. Like what are we talking about here? Like I think people, when something just looks different, right, they have to
Yeah.
say something about it, right? He doesn't look
Yeah.
like the prototypical other quarterbacks that are left in the conference championship round. And that's what people were saying. But to me, that's nonsense. Like people keep saying he's a system quarterback. No, he's elevated the system. I love Jimmy
Yeah.
Garoppolo, was one of my favorite
Yeah.
teammates. Jimmy wasn't playing like this in this system.
No.
Like I
No.
think people tend to forget Brock for majority of the year, I would say all the way up until week like 18, was top 2 in every statistical category for the quarterback position.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? He's a system guy. Like, what? Like,
I know.
that's crazy to me. So, like, you stated it perfect. A lot of quarterbacks struggle in the rain, and maybe Brock's hand size has something to do with that because he started with the
Right.
glove, took
Yeah.
the glove off, and there's a vivid video of him wiping his hand off in the middle of a drop back, which is
Yes.
ballsy on its own, right?
Yes.
But let's not forget, and I said this too, people were talking about him in that Browns game. He led them and put them in position to win the game. The
He
kicker
did.
missed 2 field goals.
Yes.
Like people
Yes.
tend to forget, like
Yes.
there needs to be content behind what you're saying. Like You say, oh, look what he did versus the Browns. You mean lead them on a game-winning drive to set the kicker up to win the game, and he missed the kick? Not only that, he missed the kick earlier, which would have gave them the lead. And then last week, right, with all the marbles on the table, led them on a game-winning drive to win the game.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? Like, you can say what you want, and this has been my pushback with Josh Allen. Like, people will say, well, what else was he supposed to do? Josh Allen was timid on that last drive, whether people want to admit it or not. Let's not forget, he should have had a pick by Trent McDuffie. And if Trent McDuffie wasn't there, the Jerry Sneed is taking it to the house because he's throwing it right to him. He fumbled the ball, and if Shamari Connor just falls on it, the game is over, right? And then people will talk about the throw to Khalil Shakir. I did a breakdown on HQ Spotlight. Josh didn't even step up into that because his arm talent is so strong. I just think he short hopped it because he was nervous about throwing an interception. And then he missed Dalton Kincaid on the next play on third and 9 to give them a first down to take more time off the clock. So people can say what you want. When I look at quarterbacks and the greatness of quarterbacks is what you do in those pivotal pressure moments, right? When the game matters, when the game is on the line, do you elevate your team then when all the pressure is on it? And we saw Brock Purdy do that last week versus Green Bay.
Thank you. I agree with everything that you just said. It bothers a lot of people that he garners the amount of hate. That criticism is fine, but I just sometimes feel like he can't win. One other big narrative going into this game is that the 49ers can't win without Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, obviously kind of a game time decision here. What are your thoughts on this? For me, I'm like, guys, did we not just win a game versus the
You said it, not me. You said
2
it, not me.
receptions, 24 yards. What are we talking about here?
Like,
What kind of an impact?
And let's not forget, this was a Green Bay team that went into Detroit and dog stomped them, right?
Yeah.
Like, this Green Bay team was probably the hottest team in football going into the playoffs, right? So, like, they didn't have Deebo the whole game. It wasn't like Deebo was there for the whole first half. He got hurt, like, on the first play when he caught the pass and was out for the rest of the game. So, Juwan, and this is another thing.
Juwan Jennings stepped up.
Yeah, but you can throw this to Brock Purdy, right? Being able to trust guys that routinely don't get those snaps. He made Juwan Jennings the focal point essentially of the offense when Deebo went out, right? And then also leaning on Chris Connolly as well. So it's just like when people have this narrative about Brock, it baffles me. Like, let's not also forget George Kittle had a massive drop that probably would have went for 20 plus yards in that game, which Kittle never does, right? You could tell he was clearly upset with himself for doing that.
Yeah.
But like for Juwan Jennings to step up, and he's had to step up before. He's a feisty guy. He's one of the heartbeats of that team too, especially on special teams because he's a gritty player, right? We see him all the time blocking guys out of bounds into the coolers. But for Brock Purdy to use Juwan Jennings and Chris Connolly and be able to still lead his team to the win, and people say, well, can they beat the Detroit Lions without Deebo? They just beat the team that beat the brakes off the Detroit Lions without Deebo. So, yes, they can clearly beat Detroit without Deebo. Now, would you like to have Deebo? Obviously. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But to say, like, they're in trouble without Deebo, I mean, they just beat Green Bay without Deebo.
Right.
So, like, I thought that was asinine, too, when people were talking about that as well.
Well, the thing is when Deebo missed time this year, Trent Williams was also out. It was more than, if you take 2 or 3 of those guys away, yes, you've got a problem.
Every team is going to struggle.
Yes. But one, they can scheme around just like one person. So what I do want to say, positive one, I think everyone in America loves Dan Campbell and loves this Lions team. Look, they're going up against my team, right? So I'm obviously heavy on the 49ers here, but I love this story. I love this for the fans of Detroit. We have seen them week in and week out show up no matter where this team is and have just been phenomenal in terms of being fans. How can the Lions win? They arguably, I think, have one of the best O-lines in the league. Is that the point?
That is the point, right? And I know we can go ahead and talk about the X's and O's now. When you look at this game, and this is not me just speaking as a former D lineman, this game is going to be won in the trenches or lost in the trenches, Katie. Because when you look at it, the 49ers have the Avengers as a defensive line, right? The Lions have the Justice League as an offensive line.
Oh,
well, that's going to be the matchup in this game. And I was a bit surprised when you look at last week, the time that Jordan Love had in the pocket. Now, Green Bay does a really good job of going 12 personnel. And for people that don't know what that means, that's 1 back, 2 tight ends. And they stayed in and they protected. So they did a really good job doing that. Now, Nick Bosa was still a thorn in Jordan Love's side. He had 5 quarterback hits. but we really didn't see anybody else show up. Like Chase Young really didn't affect the quarterback. Eric Armstead, Javon Hargrave had one good rush in the first quarter, but besides that, didn't really see him affect the quarterback. So it'll be interesting because a lot of the things that Green Bay does, Detroit does as well with the 12 personnel with Brock Wright and also Sam Laporta. And then they just signed Zach Ertz. So will we see Zach Ertz this week,
Right.
depending on the health of Sam Laporta, right? So I could see them doing some max protection thing, 2-3 man routes. And the issue for the 49ers last week was Ambry Thomas. He struggled. He struggled mightily. And we saw the Detroit Lions, when Zion McCollum came into the game, they attacked him. Would not be surprised if Ben Johnson attacks Thomas, because we know this at the cornerback position. You got to have a memory like a fish. You got to let it go when the play happens against you. And it seemed like he had a real hard time letting plays go. Played a lot of off coverage, soft, too much cushion, and Green Bay was having success against Thomas last week. So that's a matchup I'm looking. But to me, when Jared Goff, and Katie, you sent me a note, like when he's blitzed or pressured, he's really struggled. But last week versus Tampa Bay, when they blitzed, they actually picked up the protection really well. A lot of times it was 12 personnel where they had the two tight ends and stayed in protect. If you give Jared Goff time, it could be a long day for the secondary for the 49ers, because he's been pinpoint accurate. Now, let's not forget in the red zone, right? When Villa Veda gave him some pressure, he almost threw a pick six to Jamel Dean, but that was interior pressure with a 4-man rush. So that's why I said this D-line has to show up. I think the big question mark is, will Jonah Jackson, their Pro Bowl guard, will he be able to go? Because if not, Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead, they have to show up if that's the case. If Jonah Jackson can't go, they got to take advantage of the rookie left guard in that scenario. So to me, this game is going to be won and lost in the trenches. Either the 49ers, the Avengers on D-line going to take over, or the Justice League from the Detroit Lions are going to take over.
The Justice League. That's honestly so amazing. And to your point about Ambry Thomas, when I was looking at stats, and I sent you this earlier, Lions passing efficiency versus defenses versus base, which is 4 DBs, they're number 6, versus nickel, which of course is 5 DBs, they're number 20. Now the 49ers generally play more nickel, but that puts a greater emphasis on someone like Ambry Thomas having a good game. So hopefully he brushes some of that off. All right. First bet. I'm taking the Lions team total under 21.5. All season long, I've been betting over on Niners team totals. Not that I don't like it, but when you look at narratives, right? The biggest narrative for Detroit is home versus away, dome versus outside. Home games this year, they had 67 touchdowns, averaging almost 32 points per game. Away, that drops to 45 touchdowns and just 21 points per game. Also, Detroit outside. Detroit's offense has scored an average of just 17.8 points over its last 5 games in open air stadiums. So, and I could go on and on about his passer rating, everything, indoor, outdoor, it's crazy. So give me the Lions under their team total 21.5.
Yeah, to your point, it's been well documented, Jared Goff, in regards to playing in domes or outside or in inclement weather. The good thing for him is he's going back home, right?
Yeah.
So he's going back to the Bay Area. There shouldn't be, I don't think in the forecast I looked, there wasn't any rain like it was supposed to be last week.
It's going to be 70 degrees.
I think it's going to be like perfect football weather. So if you look at his record when it's, I think, like 70 above or in domes, he's been spectacular, right? So like everything bodes well in regards to Detroit for that, right? But you would think it bodes well for Brock Purdy too, playing in better weather as well. So I'm actually going to take Bang Bang Niner game -7. I just think last week was a wake-up call, right? I think also there was a lot of rust. They essentially had 3 weeks off, a lot of those guys. Some of them played in week 18, but sparingly, only a little bit. Brock Purdy didn't play for 3 weeks. Christian McCaffrey didn't play for 3 weeks. And Christian McCaffrey still looked really good in that game. I was actually mad at my guy Kyle Shanahan for not getting him going in the fourth quarter when it was a one-score game. Didn't understand that. I think I would take, if you were taking another bet on this, and I know we're getting the props later, I would take Christian McCaffrey over 30 touches. Like, I think that's the type of game it's going to be, right? Because Dan Campbell kind of let Kyle Shanahan know, we're a physical bunch. This is what it's going to be when we walk in there. And there'll be times where Kyle Shanahan gets in the mood and he'll run it like 8 straight times, right? So I think that's the type of game we're going to get this Sunday. So I like Christian McCaffrey going over 30 touches, but I like the 49ers to cover the -7. I think that defense got woke up by what happened with Jordan Love last week. They haven't played to the standard the last few weeks. And I know in the beginning of the year, people were questioning was Steve Wilks actually going to be the guy when the year ended.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were one of them
Yeah,
when the
but
year
but I
ended.
I
So
love him now. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean,
So
yeah.
they've switched some things up, right? Steve Wilkes is a guy that doesn't routinely blitz. He'll mix in some blitzes now. I think one of the biggest changes is Charvarius Ward being able to cover guys one on one, number one guy. Now, the
Oh,
question is, the Sun God, Amon-Ra St. Brown, does a lot of his work in the slot. Will they travel
mhm,
him in the slot? Haven't seen that much from Steve Wilkes and Charvarius Ward, right? If that's the
yeah,
case, Lenore's got to have a big game in the slot,
yep,
right? Because they're going to get the ball to the Sun God for
yeah,
sure. So that's one of the things I want to watch. But I just feel like this is going to be one of those games where the Niners flex their muscle, right?
yes,
I think too many close games so
yes,
far that have been to the liking of Kyle Shanahan and his
yes,
team. I think there was a little bit of rust last week. Again, weather's supposed to be perfect conditions. I think we'll see their D line start to make some headway in this game. Christian McCaffrey again. I think he has a monster game. I
mhm.
think the Niners cover the -7.
I love that, and I want Christian McCaffrey, offensive player of the year, just, cash that preseason. I think you and I were both on that, right, in the preseason on him being the offensive player of the year.
Yeah, I picked him as offensive player of the year. I picked Justin Herbert as MVP though.
Yeah. Next year, you're just a year early.
I
You're
was a
just
year early. Yeah.
You're a year early. I'm still taking Purdy to have a big game here. I'm taking him over 2.5 passing touchdowns. You can find this at plus
Ooh.
159. Because, Leash, when you look at it, the Lions are bottom of the league when it comes to
Oh,
red zone defense. They
they
rank
struggle.
29. They give up touchdowns on nearly 65% of red zone trips. And we know that the 49ers have what? The number one scoring red zone offense. They score a touchdown in 67% of trips. So I think that Purdy's going to have a good game here, and we're going to get 3 touchdown passes from him. What's a couple props
Nice.
you like?
So I'm going with the Lions running back Jameer Gibbs over 74.5 total yards, which I think is a
I love
very,
Gibbs.
I feel like that's a very low number for him. Like how I was mad at Kyle Shanahan was kind of how I was mad at Ben Johnson last week.
Mm,
Just because the Tampa Bay Bucks are really stingy against the run doesn't mean you don't keep them honest and run the football. Well, I don't know if it was Dan Campbell or Ben Johnson snapped out of it. In the fourth quarter, Jameer Gibbs got the ball, and we
yeah.
saw what happened. And if you go back to last week, Aaron Jones gave the 49ers fits. Over
Yes.
110 yards just on the ground.
Yep.
I think Jameer Gibbs is going to get going early and often in this game. And that 74.5 total yards between receiving and
Yep.
rushing, I think he crushes that number.
Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. And I know you also like Christian McCaffrey in his touches. You also like him over in his yards.
Yep, I do.
I'm looking at yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, yeah, I know that number is kind of high, 87 and a half. But if you just look at what the Lions
It's
defense is
Christian
giving up,
McCaffrey.
it is. That's what, but I've been saying it this whole show. Like I think this is going to be a game where he gets like at least 20 carries and probably 10
Yeah.
targets as well. He's going to get 30 touches on the game. And if you look at this Lions defense, like they haven't routinely, given up that number to running backs, but they're still giving up like 6 yards a carry to running backs. Like I
Yeah.
didn't understand why Dave Canales didn't run Rasheed White more. He averaged
Yeah.
6.1 yards a carry last week. And it was just like they decided him and Ben Johnson wanted to go into a 7-on-7 throwing match last week. I didn't get it. Like you throw the ball to convert and move the chains in the playoffs, but you run the ball to win games. And Ben Johnson was the latter. He did that in the fourth quarter, and the Lions won the game. So I just think Christian McCaffrey, even though that's a pretty high number, I think he still
Yeah.
crushes that number. I almost
Yeah.
went with his total number, but I think it was 128, so it had me a little nervous.
Yeah.
But 87 and a half rush yards, I think he crushes that number.
I do too. And, a lot of people say, like, oh, how, obviously you could beat the Lions through the air. They're a little bit better DVOA versus the run. But yeah, Christian McCaffrey is a different animal. And I agree with you. I think that he's just going to get a ton of touches in this game.
I think that's misleading. I think people have just been having success through the air, but if you look at them, they still give up over or nearly 5 yards a carry on the ground. So, like,
Yeah.
teams just have not been adamant about continuing to run the
Right.
football, and that's been the issue.
Which is something that the 49ers never shy away for. I'm looking at Kittle in this game. I will say, historically, I'm very good at Kittle props.
Yep, you
We
are.
cashed a lot of them last week. I know he's right over my shoulder here, or this side. I know my tight end. I like him for an anytime touchdown. It's a plus 110. I also like him
Ooh.
over 4.5 receptions. That's also a plus money, plus 102. And Leash, you know this. When the pocket starts to collapse, Purdy makes Kittle his safety valve. That
For
is the
sure.
guy that he goes to. And we do know that this Lions team can create pressure, the number one defense in pressure rate. And when Purdy has faced 15 or more pressures, Kittle averages about 7.5 targets per game compared to just like 4 when it's under 15. And some teams who got good pressure, like the Ravens, the Bucks, the Bengals, even the Giants, who like blitzed the hell out of Purdy earlier this season, Kittle had at least 7 receptions in all of
Mm.
those games. So I like him to find pay dirt, and I like him to get at least 5 receptions.
Yeah, you know what? I like that prop because if you look at Aaron Glenn and his mantra and his background, he's going to bring pressure. And I think that's
Yeah.
another thing to look at in this game, right? The 49ers offensive line and Brock Purdy deciphering if Brian Branch or Melifawu, the safety, is going to be coming off the edge because they love that slot blitz, whether it's Melifawu or it's Brian Branch. They got to be able to decipher which guy is coming, and then you have to have answers for it. I think George Kittle could be one of those answers this game.
Let's go. I mean, he comes alive in the postseason as well. All right, the time has come. Leger Douzable for Mox Lock. This is the one thing you're absolutely taking to the pay window this week. What do you got?
Bang, bang, Niner game. Taking the Niners to cover the
Yep.
-7. I'm going to actually cash this one in myself. I'm going to make this bet. Again, just being on that team, knowing the guys on that
Yeah.
team, the standard that defense is used to playing at. I know they're pissed off they didn't play to that standard
Mhm.
last week. I look for them to come out and try to dominate, right? They want to be able to jump up on this team early. And you hear people talk about it all the time. Like, who are the Niners if they're not up big in games, right? They're front runners, da 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 da. Well, they
Yep.
proved last week they can win a
Mhm.
gritty, tight game, right? I think
Mhm.
that bodes confidence and breeds confidence into them going into this week. I think Brock Purdy, people said he'll have a bounce back game, but to me, I didn't think he played all that awful as people are saying. Yes, he
No.
did have a couple grapefruits early in that game, but besides
Yes.
that, in the first quarter, I thought he played it pretty good. I think he had a pretty good game, and he played the best when it mattered the most, right?
Yes.
So I've been
Yes.
saying I think this is going to be a Christian McCaffrey game. It's
Mhm.
going to be a grimy, gritty game where Christian McCaffrey gets 20 plus touches in the run game, 10 targets in the pass game. I think the Niners -7. Go ahead and cash it in.
I love it. And, for the 49ers to get to the Super Bowl and play either the Ravens or the Chiefs, they're going to need a big dominant win here for the vibes, and the confidence going into the Super Bowl. I love that. I love laying the 7. I'm also going to take the Niners to score first. Is that plus
Mm.
127. The 49ers, Lige, have scored first in 8 of their last 10 home games. They are going to want to come out, punch them in the mouth. Obviously, if they win the coin toss, they like to defer, but let's lean on this defense to maybe get a quick 3 and out from Jared Goff out there in the cold weather. Lige, thank you so much for joining today. This conversation was so fun. You give so much good insight and knowledge. Obviously, you can follow Lige on social at Leger Douzable. You're on HQ. You're traveling for different games. You're on the radio. Tell everybody where to find your stuff.
Yeah, so me and Mox work together, CBS Sports HQ. We'll be out there in Vegas 2 weeks from now, I guess. Yeah, 2 weeks from now. Also, Sirius XM NFL Radio, and like Mox said, I do call college football games for ESPN, the American Conference. So that's where you can find me at Leger Douzable, Twitter, Instagram. I keep it simple.
Yeah, follow him on Twitter for sure because he's tweeting every game, just calling people out too. That's what I love about you. You always quote
I
tweet
keep it
people,
real.
and
We keep it real over here.
yes, you'll be like Mox. I'm like, come on, Lee, like, leave me alone. But this has been Moxie Bets presented by Caesar Sportsbook. Don't forget to follow us on social as well at Moxie Bets, and we'll see you next time. Go Niners.